there are several new people on, so welcome. Couple housekeeping items. First of all, in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there is a box labeled chat, and at any time you may type into the, there's kind of a long, thin line, like a space with a blue send button next to it. You can type in there, comment, question, anytime during the presentation or the webinar, click send, and we'll all see that come up, and we can respond as needed. Another way to ask a question is the question and answer mode for this webinar is enabled. So you should have a button on your screen that says ask a question. A little hand, ask a question. If you want to ask a question, you can just click on that, and that notifies me that somebody wants to ask a question. I can so people are able to hear you, and then I can respond, and then I'll just take back the audio when you're done. So that's a couple of house cleaning things. This is meant to be for you. So if you have questions at any time, feel free to ask. There are going to be interactive polls, which are just basically kind of multiple choice to gauge what your thoughts are, to get feedback from you regarding certain aspects of the presentation. So please respond to those, however you want. Generally, there's no wrong answer. It's just to get some ideas. So away we go. As you probably all saw in the invite, the first thing that we're going to talk about this evening is a very powerful metaphor that we're hearing more and more. It seems like the closer an election gets, the more things turn to economics. Think back to the old truism, it's the economy, stupid. This seems to be no exception. And what we're really seeing is very grand, I guess I would say, proliferation of these two metaphors that are on the screen here. Job creation equals economic growth. And that's very much starting to become accepted as common sense, even by world-class economists these days. Very, very interesting phenomenon that has actually been going on for a number of years. And I just wanted to break down the source of that metaphor so that you have a really good knowledge, and we've talked about it in workshops, talked about it in other webinars. George Lakoff has talked about it a lot, but it never hurts to get a solid handle on these metaphors because they're so powerful. First, job creation. The basis of this is that only the private sector can create jobs, and that is the moral mission of the private sector. And in fact, it is immoral for the government to impede in that job creation of the private sector in any way, shape, or form. Job creation equals prosperity, meaning wealth, and government impinges on that. So that is something that only the private sector can do. Next, the economic growth phrase reinforces this idea that government is immoral and that growth is measured by the market being the moral decider, and government impedes that private personal profit growth through regulation, taxes, and rules, and thus you get this idea of getting government out of the way allows for economic growth, which is measured by success in the market. Success in the market is largely a function of whether or not you're disciplined. If you're disciplined, you're moral, and therefore you will succeed in the market and be rich. If you are not disciplined, you are immoral, and then you crash and burn in the market, and your poverty is your punishment, etc. You've heard this likely a few times, but then you put the two together, and you get this idea of job creation equals economic growth, very powerful message metaphor that people understand. They mean some very basic things. Again, public and moral impedes private profit prosperity, and this idea that the market is a moral arbiter of things. Its decisions are just in that moral frame. So very important to understand that. And I've put together some really fun videos here that will basically show you everybody uses this. So the first one, Republicans use it. This is from 4 years ago. This is Mitch McConnell testifying in the Senate on a key amendment to EPA rules.
For new regulation through the Environmental Protection Agency that would raise energy costs for every business in America and lead to untold lost jobs for more American workers. In other words, in the midst of average gas prices approaching $4 a gallon and a chronic jobs crisis, the White House plans to make the climate for job growth worse. And that's why Republicans, led here in the Senate by Senator Inhofe, have proposed legislation to prevent this new energy tax from ever taking effect without congressional approval. The Wall Street Journal has called the amendment we're proposing, quote, one of the best proposals for growth and job creation to make it onto the Senate docket in years. Our amendment would assure small businesses across the country that they won't be hit with yet another costly new job-stifling burden by Democrats here in Washington. It will give voters the assurance that a regulation of this kind, which would have a dramatic impact on so many, could not be approved without their elected representatives standing up and actually voting for it.
Almost forgot to turn my microphone on there. Okay. So you heard him specifically say, as the Wall Street Journal repeated this metaphor of job creation, job growth, but he actually went further to talk about burdensome regulations, job-killing regulations, creating that metaphorical sense of burden, and that who were going to be the heroes to relieve that burden? Of course, the GOP. So very, very powerful metaphor there. So you see the Republicans use it. Next, yes, no surprise, Democrats use it. Here is Austin Goolsbee in 2012, was the senior White House economic advisor to President Obama. Probably will come as no surprise to many of you that he is reinforcing this metaphor. So here we go.
Obama welcomed some of the biggest names in the business to the White House for talks on how to create jobs for more Americans. Austin Goolsbee is a senior economic advisor to the president, and he joins us now from the White House. Austin, thank you for joining us.
Anytime.
All right. Well, we learned today fewer first-time jobless claims last week, but there was a spike in this reading in extended benefits, meaning out-of-work people are just not finding jobs. So what are we going to hear from the president today to change this?
Well, mainly this is a listening, information gathering kind of a forum. I think you're going to see the president likely hammer on the themes that he has been hammering recently, that the recovery, we see signs of the beginning of recovery. Jobs tend to take longer, and we've got to do everything we can to get jobs started, that the main job creation's got to come from the private sector. And so that's why he wanted to bring together all of these outside CEOs as well as labor.
Okay, that couldn't have been more clear there. Again, talking about the idea of the president hammering home this idea of job creation, job creation and economic growth, to the point of bringing in outside CEOs and labor leaders to get on board with this powerful metaphor. And not only is it here in the United States, it is now accepted worldwide. And when you read economic briefings and you read press releases or columns from people like Paul Krugman, even progressive economists, they accept this metaphor of job creation and economic growth. This is a video of Ajay Shriram, is the president of the Confederation of Indian Industry. This is just from last year, about a year ago, and you'll find this phrasing fascinating, and you will think that he might even be a politician in the United States.
We had a very positive meeting, a very open meeting, and we really appreciate the time given by the Honorable Minister to spend 1.5 hours with us and share the concerns of the industry. I think our objectives are the same, which is rapid economic growth and job creation. We have
So there you go. In the first 22 seconds, he says that the government of India and the commercial, corporate, industrial interests in India, their purposes are aligned, and that those purposes are rapid economic growth and job creation. The two go hand in hand. So there's a problem with this metaphor. As with many metaphors, there's really not a basis in reality for a metaphor. A metaphor fits a particular worldview, and it is something that is designed or comes about to frame that worldview, in this case, the conservative view of economics. In his book last year, Capital in the 21st Century, which I would, is a very good read. There are lots of resources online for this. Thomas Piketty is a French economist, and what he actually showed is this idea that the rate of return on capital. So this is investment income that the super wealthy are getting back from investments, that return on capital is greater than economic growth worldwide. True economic growth in terms of production and labor output and salaries and wages and things like that. And what he's found is that over the last decade or so, century or so, not decade, century or so, that gap between return on capital and economic growth has increased. And one of the results is increasing inequality, because this capital return is being concentrated by fewer and fewer people, and it's being perpetuated over generations, is one really fascinating thing that he found out. And this is a quote from The Guardian from last year, the British newspaper, very progressive newspaper. There's a couple interesting things here that I would really like to call to your attention, and we're going to do a short little poll here to gauge your thoughts. But this idea that what Piketty does is he accepts that certain variables like skills, training, and education of the workforce, that they promote greater equality, which we hear that all the time. But what they can be offset by is more fundamentally unsound problems that lead to inequality, which is, as they say, unleashed, where demographics or low taxation or weak labor organization allows it to happen. So that there are elements that push the trend toward inequality that are allowed to happen in certain aspects of the economic system. So what I want you to consider here, before I open up the poll, is that, so he's saying something factual about the economy. This is based on decades of research with data from around the world, and that this thing is missing from this equation of job creation equals economic growth. And the problem that we have right now is that in order for those facts to be accepted, this element needs to be framed. We're going to get to that. But I'm going to open up a poll here, and I would like to, here we go. open the poll. I'll just take a click here. Okay, so you should now see a poll come up. So based on this statement about things that lead to wealth inequality systemically, you got 5 choices there. I would ask you to vote on which you think is a critical factor missing in the conservative frame regarding economics that this whole inequality is leading to. So you have, is the private sector jobs missing from that equation? Are lower taxes missing from that equation? Government or public oversight missing? Unions or educated consumers? And go ahead and vote. We've got some voting going on now. It's like almost everybody's voted. And I will say your chances of getting a correct answer are very good. And it looks like most of you are taking advantage of your 3/5 possibility of of getting, okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. There's some people that haven't voted. If you don't want to, then that's fine. Give you another minute if you want to participate, consider. Okay, I'm gonna close the voting. Here we go. So basically, what it looks like is 60% of you said government, public oversight, regulation. 20% said unions. 40% said educated consumers. I will say that yes, every one of you got it right, because you saw in the quote from The Guardian that he acknowledges that you have unions and educated consumers are critical to addressing inequality. The one that I really wanted to focus on is this idea of government, public oversight, and regulation. But congratulations, you all got it right. I'm just going to go back to that slide, and if you look at the last that's bold in that statement, unleash wherever demographics or low taxation or weak labor organization allows it. This idea of if allowed to happen, I would argue that that's one of the key roles of the public. When you talk about the moral responsibility of the public is to protect people from, we're going to get to this later, corporate greed, and empower people. And one of the ways they can empower people is to create policy that allows for strong labor organization and also provides for progressive tax structures. So bravo all, and we will move on. So here's the question. We know what the truth is, and what framing does is framing is going to help us tell the truth about this systemic economy. And we have to include all of these aspects in our new framing of the economy. People who work, consumers and their role in the economy, and the fact that corporations and employers have a role in the system too, but they also have responsibility. And then of course the public. And here are some ideas that I put down, and of course this will be available online tomorrow. So this idea that people who work, they're the majority, obviously, that's a no-brainer. And corporations hire those people who are also the consumers to generate profit. So the cycle is that people who work are indeed profit creators because they are hired to do just that. And when we talk about profit, we're talking about the basic meaning of profit, which is that after your fixed costs, what's left is what drives the corporate world. So you see the roles of those different groups in the system. So the people, the consumers, the corporations, it's systemic. We need to talk about that. The public is also part of that system, and this is the much neglected part of that system that we need to discuss at greater length and with a stronger voice. The idea that the public has a moral responsibility, because it's all of us. And through our elected officials, we have a moral responsibility to protect people from corporate greed and inequality, and empower people to pursue meaningful life and work. How does the public do that? Through things like regulation, taxes, workforce training, rules, things like OSHA, safety, and the list goes on and on. You could even talk about infrastructure. Right? So this is a critical part of that system. What I'd like to have you walk away from with this, is that if you destroy one part of the system, the entire system will collapse. And you see this going on now. If you look at the graph, this is directly from Piketty's book here. The solid black line with the solid black squares, which runs along the top, is this rate of return to capital, and this is post-tax. So this is after taxes, after capital losses reported. This is actually the take-home money worldwide, going all the way back to year zero. And you see from year zero up to, through the Industrial Revolution, and then especially during the World Wars, which Piketty talks about at great length, the role of the World Wars in being the great equalizer of wealth worldwide. You see how these emerge. But then look what happens kind of around 1970-ish, 1980-ish. Okay, we see the split there, and we now see where actual economic growth worldwide is in a steep decline, and you see an increase in this capital return, or basically investment wealth, which is being concentrated at smaller percentages of people, and it's being passed on generationally. So this is a big problem, right? This inequality. Well, what we need to do is start shoring up that system. Again, think of it in terms of a three-legged stool. You need every part of the stool to stand, and when you take away one, such as the public, what happens? The stool collapses, right? If you weaken the consumer worker part of the stool, it gets wobbly. So we have shoring up to do, and framing is a critical part of that in terms of changing public discourse. So how do we change the frame of economics? So we point out systemic causation, that we are all connected, just as we are in nature and in the world. Economics, we're all connected. How do we do that? People who work create profit. Corporations have to behave with responsibility. They have a moral responsibility because what are they? They are chartered legal entities that are granted charters through the public, through all of us. So they have a responsibility to invest in the future because they've received benefit from all of us. And then, of course, the public having the responsibility to protect and empower these freedoms and opportunities. So I do have another poll here. I'm going to open up poll number 2. So this is strictly an opinion piece here. I'd like to get a feeling from all of you, because we have people that are actually on right now that are from all different parts of the state. We have people from the Fox Valley, we have people from southern Wisconsin, we have people from northern Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, and you all are in diverse communities. So in your community, which aspects of this progressive frame of economics do you think will resonate with people the most? And as you do this, I'd like you to consider, based on what we've just talked about and what you've seen, kind of what that message would look like moving forward. But you've got 5 choices there. Is it this idea of the public protecting and empowering? Is it private success depends on the public? Is it unions ensure a living wage portion of profit for everyone? That's kind of a different way to think about unions. People tend to think about unions as being very self-interested, but in fact, they ensure a living wage for everyone. The idea that people and consumers who work create profit and a vibrant economy, we miss that a lot of times because everybody thinks about in terms of supply, supply, supply. And then this idea of corporate greed is unpatriotic because they're not paying their fair share forward. So you've got several choices there. Go ahead and think about that. I'm going to mute my microphone and take a drink of water while you all vote. Well, I said that we had people from diverse areas, and that is very true because we have 5 possible responses, and we have each response received 20% of the responses. So obviously, you can see how systemically this is really important to be communicating this systemically so that we touch on each of these points. And why is that? Because clearly in different parts of the state, and then we can extrapolate that to different parts of the country, there's going to be a different message that resonates depending on your audience. So know your audience and know these points, and we can start changing the frame of the economy. And voting, I can close that survey. So if you have questions in the next little bit here, go ahead and click on your Ask a Question button or enter them in the chat. Obviously, we've gotten some feedback already, so you can also save questions for the end if you'd like. While we get looking at the next section of our webinar here, and I've had a lot of questions from people as I've been out and about. This idea that, well, you know, framing isn't done very widespread in terms of Democrats. You know, we don't see a lot of Democrats statewide or even nationally that are framing well. And so there's 2 aspects to that. And if you've looked at your Thinking Points journal that went out this week already, one of the reasons I wanted to focus on Bernie Sanders is because Bernie Sanders doesn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to frame this issue this way, or I'm going to make sure that I talk about the economy in the progressive frame. He doesn't need to do that because one of the points I was hoping to get across is that it's just who he is. That's just who Bernie Sanders is. He has gotten really good over 30+ years at communicating his values and his core beliefs. And when you do that, you're framing. So to say that there aren't a lot of Democrats that are framing is somewhat true, but it's also somewhat inaccurate because there are really good candidates who have won that are framing all the time because it's just who they are, and they're good at it. Or they sought advice from people who know and advise them on how to frame a certain issue or how to pivot an issue away from the conservative frame. So I thought it would be fun to just kind of take a look back at 2014. I have a few examples here of some highlights from our own home state here, because we do have some really good freshman assembly people that they are very good at evoking the progressive frame. And some of them know it, some of them don't. But when you frame, you're effective. So we're going to start out in the Fighting 57 in Neenah, Menasha, and look at Amanda Stuck versus Chris Klein. And just a little bit of disclosure here, I did have some conversations and give advice to Amanda Stuck on aspects of her campaign and things to frame. And we're going to look at a video from WSI that was a face-to-face forum with the two of them. And this is relatively kind of mid-campaign. And the question that Steve Walters is asking is kind of coming off the economic thing we just did about jobs. You're going to hear him ask about job creation. And I want you to be listening to both candidates. We're going to do a little quick question poll after you hear the video, because I want to get your feedback on who has been framing and how they frame. So here we go.
Both of you cite the need for jobs. So here's my question. What hasn't been tried to create or protect jobs in Wisconsin? Any new ideas of what should be tried or things you might be interested in working on if you were in the Assembly? I think it's your turn, Amanda.
Okay. Well, I know in the last session, the Democrats had put forward something like 22 jobs bills that never went anywhere. So they included things like Buy American, Buy Wisconsin, more funding for the tech schools, which is really important because in order to bring jobs here, we need to have the workers that are educated in the jobs employers have. So those are really important things. I think we also need to make the WEDC more transparent and a public agency again so that they are accountable, so we know what they're doing with tax dollars to bring jobs here and create jobs here.
Okay.
So those are some big things.
Thank you. On your website, Chris, you talk about, let's see, limited government, lower taxes, and pro-growth. So yeah. What's your feeling on jobs?
Sure. Well, certainly from a taxation standpoint, even though some of the reforms that we've already made in Wisconsin, we're still one of the highest tax states in the union. Continuing to streamline our tax code is important. I think that encouraging small businesses, nurturing entrepreneurs, supporting the businesses that are creating the jobs, that support people in the 57th district with the high-paying wage jobs. Redevelopment, I think, is another big aspect, especially in our.
He goes off in the weeds a little bit there on some details that obviously he was pushing in that area. But how about that? That's interesting. So close that video real quick here. So I'm going to open up the next poll. Let's see if you are, let's see, this is number 3. Okay, so there are your options. So you have which candidate evoked a frame? Did Amanda Stuck, Klein, I don't remember his first name, sorry. Did they both evoke their respective frames? So did Stuck evoke the progressive frame? Did Klein evoke the conservative frame? Did they both evoke conservative? Did they both evoke progressive? And think about how they responded. Amanda Stuck talked about Buy American, Buy Wisconsin, talked about WEDC being more of a public agency, so it had transparency. She talked about public investment in training, things like that. And then you had Klein talked about limited government, lower taxes, that kind of thing. So, and again, there's honestly no answer here, because if you didn't hear one frame, then clearly they didn't communicate it well enough. So don't be bashful. The votes are coming in fast and furious now. Almost there. Okay, we've got just about all of the responses in. So most of you heard what I heard, that they both evoked their respective frames. There were some votes that Klein evoked the frame and that's Stuck did not. And I can see where it was a little bit tricky, because right at the end of what she said, she did reference the whole create jobs metaphor. But I think overall, in that it's hard to get in that little snapshot, but the idea that she talked about public investment, she talked about public responsibility in terms of having WEDC, the Economic Development Corporation, be put back into more of a public model, so that they had transparency, they had responsibility, and clearly this idea of buying American, buying Wisconsin, in terms of the idea of community is important. And Klein clearly had all the talking points. In fact, Steve Walters evoked them himself directly from his website, talking about limited government and lower taxes, and this idea of the public being immoral and not having a role in economic growth. So well done, everybody. And so what we see is the outcome of that election was that Amanda Stuck won 54 to 46. Now this is interesting because you had, this is not an overtly blue, it goes back and forth, especially in terms of congressional top of the ticket versus local. So you had voters were presented with a moral option, and we're going to see a bit later how that's important. So next, we have in the 81st Assembly District, what I think is one of the most beautiful areas of the state, the kind of Baraboo, Portage, Devils Lake, Bluffs area, Dave Hine versus Ashton Kirsch. And Kirsch kind of being this very new, but very kind of polished, almost Paul Ryan image type of person. And when you see the video, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's look at, we're going to see Ashton Kirsch first. This is another WISI video. And he's talking to Steve Walters. This is really interesting about his business. And his business is planting trees in memory or in honor of people. That's his business. And then he's going to go on and talk about kind of his vision and why he's in the race and what's important to him. And kind of pay close attention to just kind of the imagery he uses, some of the metaphors, and then just kind of generally what he's all about.
Sustainable alternative to contemporary burial processes, and just really, show the world that we can do this through the free market, and we don't need the heavy hand of government to come down and mandate.
Well, I don't mean to turn this into an ad for your business. I just found it very intriguing. Tell me what issues drew you into this campaign, Ashton?
Sure. So I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I see her future. I see my generations, my contemporaries, And I see that it's looking bleak. People my age, people older, a little bit younger, they can't find work. They can't find something to do. And I can only imagine what that's going to do to my daughter. I look at her and I see, you know, something needs to change. We need to create a system where she can have the same future I had, if not better. She can have the future that my parents had, my grandparents had. This country is founded upon the American dream, and I'm fighting to bring that dream back and reinvigorate this state, because I think that we live in the best state in the nation. I don't want Wisconsin to be the best that Wisconsin can be. I want Wisconsin to be that shining star. I want Wisconsin to be, it should be Texas, it shouldn't be Florida, it shouldn't be those other places when we think about freedom, when we think about business and we think about opportunity. It should be Wisconsin. We should be the example. We should be the best in the country.
So how about that? And I'm because we're going to do a little poll on this, I'm not going to tip the scales in any way, shape, or form. So here's Dave Considine, and I believe he's talking about, yes, he's talking about this idea of Wisconsin rejecting the Medicaid expansion through the federal government and why that is an important issue to him. So this is Dave Considine.
Governor Walker and leaders of the Senate and Assembly did not accept the federal money to expand MMA health care benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was a wise or a not so wise choice?
I think that was not a very wise choice.
You would have voted to take the federal money?
I would have. Those are Wisconsin taxpayer dollars, either now or they will be. I know that we run on deficit budgets, but I believe
choice.
I think that was not a very wise choice.
You would have voted to take the federal money?
I would have.
Video seems
those
to be
are
hung up a bit here.
Wisconsin taxpayer dollars. We're going to get our kids there, and I think that's
get it caught up. There we go. Okay. Take two.
They don't prescribe how we have to get our children to those standards. They allow the local school district, the local teacher to decide this is how we're going to get our kids there.
And MMA health care benefits. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was a wise or a not so wise choice?
I think that was not a very wise choice.
You would have voted to take the federal money?
I would have. Those are Wisconsin taxpayer dollars, either now or they will be. I know that we run on deficit budgets, but I believe in community. And when we leave a piece of our community behind, when we leave the poor people behind us, our whole communities suffer. And that's why I think we needed to take that. We need to take care of all of our community, whether it's the poor, the aged, senior citizens, or veterans. We need to take care of the whole community.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. We have Considine, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go back to the poll. This is going to be the same format for these two. So, which candidate evoked a frame? So we have Dave Considine, the Democrat, who you just heard, Kirsch, the Republican, who went first. They both evoked their respective frames, or both evoke progressive, both evoke conservative. The voting is now open. Ah, interesting. Mm-hmm. 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 I can see that. So just about everybody's voted, and what's interesting is, so we've got some people who said that they both evoked the progressive frame. And I actually did hear Kirsch reference this idea of community and this kind of idea of better community, all Wisconsin. So yeah, he did kind of go by conceptual there, didn't he? The majority of people have said that they each evoke their respective frames, which is actually true. The Kirsch thing was a little more subtle, but this idea of, he talked about specifically, made some notes here, freedom, business, and opportunity. And in terms of Wisconsin being the shining star, the leader of creating an environment where there's freedom. And when he talks about freedom, he's talking about business freedom and opportunity for oneself. And I think this is interesting that we talked about the whole investment income and wealth going across generations. I think when he talks about his daughter, I think he's talking about that his wealth be able to transfer to his daughter, and so that wealth provides her with opportunities as it did him. It's hard to say. It could even be happening unconsciously, but I just found it really interesting that he was so focused on his daughter, whereas Dave Considine talked about the whole community. That as a representative of the public, we have to protect the entire community. We have to make sure we don't leave anybody behind, that kind of thing. So some really interesting dynamics there. But I think overall, it's safe to say that they both did evoke their respective frames. But again, I can see how hearing Kirsch talk about community leads one to evoke the progressive frame. So again, biconceptualism going on there. So the election results were the same. Considine won by about 8 points. It was actually a little less than 8 because it was like 54 and change and 45.7 or something like that. So, but still, Considine won. So again, in a relatively blue or kind of purple district, the real definition of a purple district, effectively evoking frames, both progressive and conservative, provide voters with a moral choice. Again, this idea that we are hardwired for empathy. So there is evidence that when the two frames go head to head, it is possible for the progressive frame to be dominant. So the next point I want to make in this section about 2014 is the idea that framing is critical to attack ads. I've had some conversations with people who insist that attacking works. Attacking is a good strategy. It works all the time. It's something you have to do. And I would say the evidence is mixed on that. When you look at attacks, sometimes they backfire. Sometimes they are just not effective. But what I've noticed is that where a frame is established, an attack ad will work. So that framing is critical to an attack ad. And this race from 2014 was an amazing race to watch. Al Franken, from the very progressive Democrat from Minnesota, versus Mike McFadden, basically a hedge fund banker, investment banker, running on the Republican side, very well funded, and one of the most contested seats in 2014. So we're going to start out here. McFadden, if I can pull up the video. Here's Al Franken. Okay. So McFadden was the first out of the gate. He established his frame. And this is one of his mic segments. So just give a listen here and hear how he frames this himself.
Welcome to another Minute with Mike. And here's my dad, Mike McFadden.
Opportunity is the key to the American dream. It's the ability to be able to succeed. And I like to use the term earned success. And I've tried to instill that in my children. And that means you have to earn it. You're not given it. You have to earn it. You have to work hard. And one of the things Mary Kate and I have learned as parents is we have to allow our children to fail. I mean, they have to fail. We can't do everything for them. We can't be with them all the time. We have to instill a sense of value and confidence in them so they go out and they try things. But we tell them all the time, we're not.
So you get the idea there. He's talking about how people have to earn it, they have to work hard. This idea of discipline, discipline being necessary for prosperity and success, and that defines who you are. The idea of America, better life through success and discipline, and also you very much get the idea that government intrudes on that. So clearly well ensconced in the conservative frame. So then Al Franken comes along, and he establishes himself in the progressive frame. And what's really interesting about this is this ad goes after the profession of his opponent. And I want you to listen to, they're very short, they're like 30 seconds each. But you'll hear how this attack ad fundamentally attacks this whole idea of investment bankers and, well, you'll hear it.
Years ago, a lot of Minnesotans lost their homes, their life savings, their jobs. One of the main reasons? Wall Street banks were actually paying the credit rating agencies to give AAA ratings to financial products that were junk. The game was rigged. In the Senate, I reached across party lines and led the fight against this scam. Wall Street wasn't happy about that, but I don't work for them. I work for you. I'm Al Franken, and I approve this message.
Okay, and we're going to go right into the next one here.
Last year, 25 Wall Street hedge fund managers made $21 billion. 25 guys made $21 billion. But here's what should really bother you. Washington gives hedge fund managers a special tax break, so they pay taxes on that income at half the rate you pay. I'm working to get rid of these special breaks. The Wall Street hedge fund guys may not like that, but I don't work for them. I'm Al Franken. I approve this message because I work for you.
Okay. So I hope you see what he did there. He undermined McFadden in the progressive frame. So you consider the progressive frame, as we've talked about earlier tonight, public necessary for private prosperity, responsibility to protect people from greed and corruption, and power to pursue meaningful lives, or responsibility to act through empathy, right? All of these things, what he's saying is, he's saying this.
And I approve this message.
Where do you go to avoid paying taxes? How about Bermuda? That's where Mike McFadden's company benefits from a tax loophole to avoid paying American taxes. There's Ireland. McFadden's company made $11 million on a deal to help a company avoid taxes by moving there. China? McFadden supports tax breaks for companies that move our jobs overseas. Anywhere you go, Mike McFadden is not for us.
Okay. So, I want to get your impression of that and open the next poll. Should be popping up in your screen. So now, there's probably no wrong answer here, maybe. So this is an opinion poll. I guess there's no wrong answer here. What was this Al Franken ad saying about Mike McFadden? That last one with the jet going off to Bermuda. What is it that he's rich? He's greedy? He hates puppies? He's a conservative nut job? Or his actions are immoral? And well, you all are very decisive. Everybody's very decisive. Yes, you all got that. I'm going to end the voting because everybody's voted already. Yes, his actions are immoral. That's exactly right. That is exactly how you undermine your opponent through framing. You know, this idea of moral undermining is critical. Think of how Tammy Baldwin did that with Tommy Thompson when she said, he's not for you anymore. And you heard Franken say that exact same thing. So the strategy is this. This is how you do it. You establish the progressive frame on an issue. And also, you have to establish the universality of those values, right? So what Franken did by saying, you know, either he's not for you or I work for you, is you create this concept that we all share those values. And you have to evoke them. You can't just say we all share values. You have to evoke those ideas we've been talking about all night. Then you attack your opponent by saying how they are violating the moral tenets of the frame you have established. Right? So you don't go after them by saying, oh, he's not a job creator. You go after him by saying he's immoral because of X. He has violated the public trust by not paying his fair share of taxes, and that's greedy and unpatriotic, something like that. So while you are attacking your opponent in your frame, pointing out how they violate your frame, you strengthen your frame, which also means you weaken your opponents. So really important stuff there. And yes, Al Franken won by, I just realized I did not put the slide up that showed the results of that election, but it was very close. He won by less than 2 points. So he was in the race of his life, and he won. And I believe he was also outspent. So we're going to move right along here because it's already 8 o'clock. It's already been an hour. Wow. So this is going to be fun time. You know, if you have questions that pop into your mind, feel free. But we're going to do a little Mr. Science here, Science Corner. And the question in Science Corner today is, are we in control of our own decisions? Right, so we're going to talk about this in terms of economics, because this seems to be the theme tonight. But think about it in terms of broader political discourse, in terms of complex political decisions, and are we in control of those? So Dan Ariely is a behavioral economist, and this is from a TED Talk he gave, and I will put this TED Talk up on my website along with the archived video of this, along with the talk that Thomas Piketty did based on his Capital in the 21st Century book. So you can watch both of those. They're both really interesting, and I would encourage you, the Piketty TED Talk is a little bit dense in terms of economics, but I would encourage you to go through the full TED Talk because the question and answer at the end is fascinating. And it's the first time I've ever heard somebody say that taxes are a good thing because it's knowledge in terms of data collection. So anyway, so what Ariely is saying is that this research that he's done in how we make decisions reinforces how powerful our unconscious influence on decision making is. And that in fact it is absolutely normal for all of us to think irrationally. We all think irrationally all the time. We make decisions irrationally, and it's normal. And we need to know this. obviously for framing and for all of you as framing leaders in your community and political policy advocates, very important. So when you consider that our most accurate sense that we've evolved with is vision, it tells us something very important about irrational thinking and are we in control of our own decisions. So you see a slide there which has two tables, and I'm not going to ask them because by now you've probably reasoned that it is indeed a trick question. But the challenge is, you see the two red lines at the bottom of the slide under which table is longer. Those two lines are the exact length of the horizontal line of one table side and the vertical line of the other table side. And the question obviously is which table is longer. Well, they're both the same length. Now, I can tell you that. You can look at the red lines and reason that, yes, they are indeed factually the same length. But even knowing this, when you look at it, it's impossible for you to actually not see them as one being longer than the other. It is a cognitive illusion. Here's another good one, demonstrating how our vision, our brain fools us as to how it processes our perception of what we see. So you see two squares of the Rubik's Cube are, there's two arrows pointing at each square, and which color, which colors are those two squares? So unless you're colorblind, you're probably seeing the top one as being some kind of brown color, deep mustard color, and then you're seeing the one on the side facing you that's in the shadows as yellow, right? That's what you're all seeing. Well, guess what? When you overshade the entire cube, you find that they are indeed the same color. They're all going, no way, come on, it's a trick. No, it's not a trick. There is the, with the full color exposure, and then when you cover, shade everything else but those two squares, they are indeed the same color. And there's no possible way for you to not see different colors, again, unless you're colorblind. So pretty fascinating. It's interesting. And there's actually time-elapse video of this on various websites if you want to check it out for yourself. But there's something really important going on here. And what Ariely says is that vision is a metaphor for the rest of our senses and for how our brain functions, because our vision is so accurate compared to the rest of our senses. So if our vision is so easily fooled, think about things as simple as seeing color or discerning differences in length. Think of how easily it is to fool us in terms of complex thought. And he refers to this idea of financial decision making, which is what his area of expertise is. And the fact that there's no easy way for us to see our mistakes because of this perceptual bubble that we live in. So there's some examples here that this is what we're going to have some fun with here. You're all going to be doctors. And this is going to illustrate how the more complex a decision is, the greater your unconscious perception is in making decisions that you are probably less in control of than you think. And this is from a study by Redelmeier and Shafir done in 2004. And so you are a group of physicians. You have a patient who's a 67-year-old farmer with a hip problem. So many of you in the rural areas that are on right now can relate to this. And you've tried a lot of different medications for this ongoing hip problem. Nothing's working. So you've decided to refer this patient to hip replacement. So this is a decision that you've already made. So in review of the case, one of your colleagues comes up and says, you know what? You've never tried ibuprofen. So, I've looked through the meds you've given this patient, and you've never tried ibuprofen. So in this study that I referenced, they told half of the physicians in the study that you have a decision to make. And now I'm going to open up the poll, and you are going to make the same decision that the physicians had to make. So, question before you is, what course do you take for your patient with your colleague coming to you and saying, after reviewing the case, you haven't tried ibuprofen? So you have to decide, do you proceed with the hip replacement or do you try ibuprofen? So voting's open. And sure, shooting. Okay, that went really quick. So, and it should have, right? This should be a relatively easy decision to make. And in fact, it will tell you that you all made the same decision that the physicians in the study did. Overwhelmingly, they pulled the patient back from the hip replacement and tried ibuprofen. So now there was a second set of physicians in the study. So the second half presented with a different scenario. Now, process this. So after reviewing the case, your colleague comes to you and says, there's two medications that you didn't try. Ibuprofen and piroxicam, which is another non-steroidal analgesic. It diminishes inflammation. That has a side effect that's known to increase heart attack risk, and there's other side effects, right? So they asked the physicians this question. Do you take your patient off this path to hip replacement now and try the drug treatments, or do you proceed with the hip replacement? And further, if you take the patient off of the hip replacement, which drug do you try? So let's see how you all do on this last session. A little bit more difficult decision. So which course do you take now? Knowing that if you try one drug, it may not work. Do you proceed with the hip replacement? Do you pull and start ibuprofen? Do you pull some piroxicam? And you're going to find the difference in your results fascinating from the difference in the physician's results. And there's a reason for it, which we'll talk about in a second. And it looks like almost all the votes are in. Okay. They're pretty much all in, and interesting, you all made the same decision. So in this study, remember that the two groups of physicians were tested blind. They only knew, one group knew that they either chose hip replacement or ibuprofen. The other group had to choose between hip replacement and make a decision on two medications. You all chose the ibuprofen route again. Why? Because you were biased with your previous choice. However, in the actual study itself, most of the physicians said that they would go on with a hip replacement surgery. True story. True story. I'm sure you're all shaking your head in disbelief, but it should give you something really, really important to think about in terms of what recommendations you get from your doctor and what you do with them, but also in terms of how we are biased by pre-existing. So the bottom line that I want you to take away with all your framing tonight and everything on economics is that we all have a view of ourselves and others that's very similar to what Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet. What a piece of work is man, how noble and reasonable in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a God. Well, as Dr. Ariely said, in terms of cognitive scientists and behavioral scientists, it's not so much that view of the human mind, but it's more this view. The X-ray of Homer Simpson in his tiny brain there. But there's a silver lining to all this, because what we're doing now in terms of framing and learning how to do this provides us with things that are important, because in the physical world, in things that we build, what we do, how we do things, actions we take, we know our physical limitations. There are things that we physically can't do, we accept that, and we develop systems to accommodate that. We need to have the same process in the world of thought. We ignore cognitive limitations. We have this view of ourselves as being very rational human beings. But if we were to recognize our limitations, we would then be able to create a better system in the world, just as we do for the physical world we live in terms of choices that we present to people and how people are presented with decisions to make and the information they have. And I think, just to wrap up here, I think that's something that framing empowers us to do. I think framing empowers us a way to get at those unconscious core values to communicate people what's important. So that's it for tonight. If there's any questions, feel free. Otherwise, this archived webinar will be up sometime tomorrow, along with the links to the videos I referenced. And in addition, if any of you are looking for something to do on Saturday and you are not committed to it yet, or you have nothing else to do, from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I will be giving a workshop run by the Richland County Dems that Rita Whitwer has organized. And that is going to happen at the Richland County Democratic Party headquarters, which is right on Main Street. And it's going to be a lot of new information. There's going to be some message building going on. And if you need an invite, if you want information, send me an email. You've all got my email, or send a contact thing on my website. And that's going to be a really fun and informative group. And then at the end of the month, on the 30th, I'll be doing the last two Move to Amend sessions in Madison. And there may be some seats open for that. So that information is all on my website. Or you can email me, and there will be more things coming up in the future. So I don't see any questions. Thanks for your participation. Great feedback. This is really good stuff. Thanks all, and have a great night.